Since the early years of this century, the submarine has been one of the few weapon systems that can truly be called strategic. It has ability to choke the seaborne commerce of a nation. More recently, nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines have become the primary means of potential global annihilation. The combination of stealth coupled with awesome power has made the techniques of countering submarines absolutely vital in the war at sea. Aircraft represent a highly effective means of hunting down and destroying submarines. Maritime surveillance of targets above the waves can often be performed by relatively simple machines and sensors, but anti-submarine warfare calls for much greater capability. Modern anti-sub warfare aircraft are extensively equipped with complex sensors and avionics for the challenging task of finding, localizing, and destroying hostile submarines. Aircraft like the American P-3 Orion, the British Nimrod, and the French Atlantique carry homing torpedoes, mines, and missiles to hunt down their prey. But these modern sensors and weapons are a far cry from the early attempts to hunt subs from the air. The submarine really came into its own as a strategic weapon during World War I. U-boats came close to winning the war for Germany by sinking over 8 million tons of Allied merchant shipping. In the absence of any sensors, sub-hunting was done purely by visual means. Patrolling flying boats such as the Felix Stowe F.3 spearheaded the Royal Navy's efforts to hunt German U-boats. Also used were biplanes launched off the decks of battleships. This remarkable sequence from World War I shows an attack in July of 1918 on the British submarine C-25 by a flight of German Hansa seaplanes. Led by Oberleutnant Christensen, the flight attacked the sub off Harwich in the North Sea with bombs and machine guns, killing the captain and 5 ratings. As he fell, mortally wounded, the second coxswain shouted, "Never mind me, sir, dive!" But the sub could not do so because her pressure hull had been pierced. The submarine survived a second aerial attack and was towed into port by the British mine-laying submarine E-25. In World War II, U-boats once again nearly won the war for Germany. Successful Allied prosecution of the war in Europe depended absolutely upon a steady flow of supplies being maintained by merchant convoys between Britain and North America. The primary weapon used by the Germans to strangle this flow was the U-boat. RAF Coastal Command had only a limited number of long-range patrol aircraft to escort convoys, let alone perform long and systematic sea patrols. Germany's seizure of the French Atlantic ports allowed reduced transit times for the U-boats to their hunting grounds. From mid-1940, the number of Allied merchant vessels sunk seemed to increase by a quantum factor. In 1941, almost 2.5 million tons of merchant shipping were lost. To counter the U-boat, RAF Coastal Command had the Short Sunderland flying boat, one of the best anti-sub aircraft of the war. But now technology in the form of air-to-surface vessel radar was beginning to be utilized. By mid-1941, half of Coastal Command's patrol aircraft were thus equipped. Another effective long-range patrol flying boat entered the fight, the American PBY Catalina. One of its primary missions was to destroy surfaced U-boats transiting through the Bay of Biscay. But even long-ranged Catalinas operating from Britain, North America, and Iceland could not provide cover for convoys in the mid-Atlantic. This gap was fully exploited by U-boats using wolf-pack tactics, which decimated the convoys. By the end of 1942, losses had doubled to 5.5 million tons, or over 1,000 ships sunk. Gradually, the gap was closed with the introduction and strength of very long-ranged Liberator aircraft. By 1943, the tide of war had turned against the U-boat, so that it was reduced from a predatory wolf to a hunted dog. The Battle of the Atlantic was arguably the single most important one of the war. Had the U-boats won, Britain would not have been able to sustain war against Germany, and leading the fight against the U-boat had been the anti-submarine airplane. Anti-sub patrol aircraft were no less important in the Pacific theater. Among the most important U.S. Navy types were radar-equipped Lockheed Harpoons and Venturas. The massive Soviet naval expansion of the 1950s laid the foundations for modern anti-sub warfare. Among Admiral Gorshkov's plans for blue water domination during the Cold War at sea were fleets of modern submarines. The development of these submarines threw the ASW mission into sharp prominence. The dominance of the aircraft over the ocean was reversed, and new techniques and technologies had to be devised. The growth of the Soviet Navy and fear of its growth necessitated more constant coverage of the oceans than could be achieved using a handful of aircraft carrier groups and outdated maritime patrol aircraft. At the same time carrier aviation was revolutionized, America was developing a new generation of land-based, long-range patrol aircraft, such as the Lockheed Neptune, probably the best sub-hunter of the 1950s. These were intended to operate in both the maritime patrol role, carrying out surveillance on Soviet surface vessels, but also in the ASW role, monitoring the movement of Soviet submarines and engaging them if it ever became necessary. With extensive maritime interests, Britain, too, had a need for a capable maritime reconnaissance and ASW aircraft. Fulfilling these roles for RAF Coastal Command during the 1950s and 60s was the Avro Shackleton, a development of the Lincoln bomber. The Shackleton also served in South Africa. The introduction of nuclear submarines with teardrop hulls capable of sustaining high underwater speeds presented a challenge to anti-submarine warfare forces, who also had to react to reductions in noise levels and advances in tactics and countermeasures. The deployment of the first ballistic missile-carrying submarines in the late 1950s drove progressive improvements in ASW aircraft and equipment. Along with new airframes came developments in radar and in active and passive sonar. American supercarriers made inviting targets for the expanding Soviet submarine fleet, and older aircraft carriers were hastily modified and modernized to serve as a dedicated ASW platform, equipped with ASW aircraft and helicopters. These were then deployed to cover mid-ocean gaps beyond the range of land-based aircraft and to screen U.S. Navy attack carrier groups against Soviet submarines. The U.S. Navy's primary carrier-based ASW aircraft was the twin-engine Grumman tracker. Incredibly, some examples remain in service today in the ASW role, albeit in heavily updated form, with Brazil and Taiwan. France also chose to develop a dedicated ASW aircraft for her two carriers. The Breguet Alizé first flew in prototype form in 1956 and became the Aéronaval's primary ASW aircraft of the 1960s. Mission equipment in the form of sonobuoys are carried in large wing fairings, while a search radar is housed in a retractable dust bin below the fuselage. Now long overdue for replacement, the Alizé has lived well past its expected retirement date. Many systems were upgraded during the mid-1980s to keep it viable in the hunt against modern submarines. Submarines are the original stealth weapons. They are designed for two purposes only, to hide and to kill. They are very good at both, which means that in war it becomes vital to stop them. A surfaced submarine is an easy target for any aircraft, but once it has slipped beneath the waves, it presents a uniquely challenging problem. But by its very presence, a submarine disrupts its environment sufficiently to allow very sensitive sensors to pick up these disturbances. The large metallic mass causes a local disturbance in the Earth's magnetic field. Its passage through water leads to cavitation noises. A nuclear-powered submarine may also be picked up by the noise made by its reactor cooling systems. Each class of submarine has a distinctive sound signature caused by its propeller and hull configuration. Submerged submarines at large are best hunted by other submarines or specially equipped ASW surface vessels. Working in conjunction with frigates and destroyers, the ASW aircraft or helicopter uses its sensors to breach the interface between sky and sea. And once its prey is found, the ASW aircraft can act as an extension of the ship by killing the target with weapons, usually homing torpedoes. With the sub moving at 35 knots at depths up to 750 meters, it is not enough to drop a torpedo vaguely in the vicinity. Although they can make repeated attacks, torpedoes have limited ranges, speeds, and cones of detection. It is essential to pass on to the weapon all that is known about the submarine's depth and track prediction. The British Stingray torpedo can be programmed with that data just before launch. This information is assimilated with its own algorithms to determine the optimum intercept profiles. Much like an aerial missile intercept, the torpedo is programmed to pursue a jinking sub and to ignore any decoys it may launch. The dynamics of a sub-chase are heavily weighted in favor of the boat, making the task of detecting it all the more important. During the Cold War, the greatest threat to Britain's maritime integrity came from the Soviet submarine fleet. The primary means of defense was the British aerospace Nimrod. Developed from the Comet jetliner in the 1960s and named after the mighty Greek hunter, Nimrod is a highly capable ASW hunter-killer aircraft. It is now being upgraded for service well into the 21st century. The U.S. Navy's primary land-based ASW aircraft is the Lockheed Orion. Like the Nimrod, it too was developed from a passenger-carrying aircraft of the 1950s, the turboprop-powered Electra airliner. The 10-crew Orion entered service in 1962 and replaced the Neptune. It was the world's first ASW aircraft with a centralized computer to integrate and process information from such various sensors, such as the search radar, magnetic anomaly detection, sonar, and forward-looking infrared. Able to carry a heavy weapons load, it also has an important secondary anti-surface vessel role, as well as carrying out other important missions, most notably electronic warfare. The Orion has been exported to 14 other countries. Unlike Nimrod and Orion, the European-developed Atlantic was not derived from an airliner, but as a purpose-built ASW aircraft for the maritime air arms of France, Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands. Entering service in 1965, the 12-crew Atlantic has a French search radar and American ASW avionics similar to those of the Neptune. Upgraded first-generation aircraft continue to serve in Italy and Germany. The Atlantic is also in service in limited numbers with the Aero Naval, but has largely given way from 1989 to a second-generation Atlantique, or ATL-2, which has totally new systems, avionics, and equipment. Shipborne helicopters play a major role in sub-detection. The Royal Navy's primary ASW helicopter is the Westland Sea King, which also carries out this role with 4 other nations. Another highly successful ASW design is the versatile Lynx. Combat proven during the Falklands War, it is probably the world's best medium shipborne helicopter. Along with ASW, other major roles include anti-ship, light attack, troop transport, and communications. Major Lynx operators are the Royal Navy and the Aero Naval. It has also been exported to 10 other naval air arms. The U.S. Navy's primary shipboard ASW helicopter until the mid-1980s was the Sea King. It has now largely given way to the SH-60 Seahawk multipurpose helicopter. The SH-60 serves aboard frigates and destroyers, but also carries out inner zone protection of aircraft carriers. Appalling losses of merchant vessels in 2 world wars have shown that the submarine is arguably the most fearsome strategic weapon ever seen. The very latest in ASW technology is embodied in the Merlin. Developed jointly by Britain and Italy to replace the Sea King as their next-generation large naval helicopter, the Merlin points the way forward for subhunting. Exceedingly difficult to detect and able to choke a nation's sea lanes or obliterate it with nuclear weapons, the submarine poses a grave danger. The anti-sub warfare aircraft remains perhaps the most effective means of countering this threat to the nation's maritime integrity and the freedom of the high seas.